Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Breaking the Mold Volume 2, presented by the Tackle Talk podcast. This four-part series is dedicated to four tackle companies who are pushing the envelope of bait design and bringing unique, innovative products to market. On today's episode, we are joined by the founder and owner of Clutch SWIMBAITS, Josh PLADIES. Episode 2 of Breaking the Mold Volume 2 starts right now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another very special episode of the Tackle Talk podcast as we bring you episode 2 of Breaking the Mold Volume 2, which we'll get to in just a second. But first, the Tackle Talk podcast is presented by American Legacy Fishing. And we got some big news from ALF in addition to stocking your favorite rods, reels, line, baits, apparel. American Legacy Fishing now offers installation services. Yes, if you have a boat anywhere near Indiana, the guys at American Legacy Fishing can now rig your boat out for you. That means power pole installation, installing your graphs and stack mounts and transducers, lithium batteries, chargers, sea deck padding, even boat cleaning and detailing. The guys at ALF also told me that they're currently taking trade-ins on select trolling motors and electronics if you have some of those laying around that are not being used. Add all of that to the long list of benefits you already know about ALF, like their price match guarantee, the internet's best selection of gently used fishing gear, the easiest trade-in program for your old gear on the planet, and now fully rigging out your boat and accessories, and you've got, in my humble opinion, the best tackle shop in the country, all family-owned and operated right here in the Midwest. And more big news, we have a brand new Tackle Talk code for American Legacy Fishing from here on out, which is going to be Tackle Talk 5. Now, that code is going to get you 5% off, but here's the big part. Unlike our last code, this code is stackable. So we heard a lot of you talk to us and say, hey, ALF runs so many sales that it's hard to use the coupon code because so many of the things on the website are not regularly priced because they run too many sales. Well, now this code is stackable on top of sale items, which gives you even bigger savings. In my opinion, it's a better option because now you can use it on regularly priced and sale items. Again, that code is Tackle Talk 5, so be sure to use that from here on out. Code Tackle Talk 5 at checkout to save you even more on both regularly priced and sale items over at AmericanLegacyFishing.com. Also, very, very quickly, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder that in a few short weeks, I will be at the Columbus Fishing Expo, February 7th, 8th, and 9th. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all day, I will be there. We'll have a booth. We'll have some sweet new merch that you guys that are attending the expo will have the exclusive opportunity to get your hands on first. And then anything that's left over will hit the website afterwards. We've got some cool new designs, some new apparel, some new drinking vessels, all kinds of cool stuff. But we also are going to have micro buzzes at the booth, the bait that I helped design a couple years back, available at a great show price. And wink, wink, nod, keep your eye out for a very special announcement soon, as we're planning to have a very limited, numbered, and signed variation of that particular bait at the show, first come, first serve. So more on that in the coming weeks, but I will be there doing seminars, we'll be there hanging out at the booth, talking fishing, taking pictures, signing whatever you guys want, all that good stuff. We're just there to have a great time and hang out. Our buddy Mike Iaconelli will also be there. Fred Rabanus will be there. It should be a great time, so mark your calendars. February 7th, 8th, and 9th, we will be at the Columbus Fishing Expo. Be sure to stop by and hang out. Okay, everybody, that brings us to episode 2 of Breaking the Mold Volume 2, which, as we talked about last week, is a 4-part series dedicated to some of the most innovative products and companies in the industry today, which also happen to be some of my personal favorite products from the past year. So last week we had on Flint Pierce, the owner of Battle Baits, and holy smokes, did you guys show up and support Battle Baits. We darn near sold out every color of minigun that Flint had loaded on the website, and that was with him stocking stocking up in anticipation for like weeks before the episode. So thank you guys so much for going over there and supporting Flint. He makes a great product. He's a fantastic guy. And this is why we choose these 4 companies, right? Because they are great folks that make great products. And today is no exception. So today, episode 2 is all about clutch swim baits. Now, you guys know over the past probably year or two, I've gotten much more heavy into the big bait, glide bait, swim bait game than I ever used to be. And over the past few years, I've been fortunate enough to try quite a few different brands of glides and swim baits. And I can tell you, today's guest is one of the best. So Josh PLADIES is the founder, owner, and lead designer at Clutch Swim Baits, who is another small, independent, truly bootstrapped company that deserves to be recognized. Josh is, true to this series, a very analytical, critically thinking, innovative guy that takes his craft very seriously, and it shows in his products. But today, we're talking about one product in particular, and it's the Clutch Eco Glide Bait. And the Clutch Eco is a special bait that I've put a ton of time in with over the past probably year or so. I got my first Clutch Eco probably about this time last year, and it's just a bait that I keep reaching for. So I won't give too much away because we're obviously going to talk about that in the episode here, but it's a smaller 6 1/4 inch glide bait. It weighs 1.75 ounces. So it's a slightly smaller, completely handmade, full resin glide bait. But here's the best part. It comes in under $100 with an MSRP of $95. So if you're hip to the glide bait world, a true handmade, hand-tuned, full resin glide bait at under $100 is almost unheard of. Those baits are usually at a minimum like $125, $150, $175, even $200 and up sometimes. But at $95, this Clutch Eco is the perfect bait if you've ever been like curious or semi-curious about getting into true glide bait fishing, but you're on a budget, or even if you're just looking for a great addition to your current lineup. If you're a seasoned glide bait veteran, it doesn't matter if I was a northern angler or a southern angler, a largemouth or a smallmouth angler, intermediate or advanced. I personally would have a Clutch Eco in my box at all times, and I have had a Clutch Eco in my box at all times since I bought it last spring. And here's where we're going to come in and hopefully help you guys even a little bit more. Similar to last week, if you're listening to this episode today and you want to try a Clutch Eco for yourself, I have good news, because in true Tackle Talk fashion, we are here to save you money. So I talked to the guys over at American Legacy Fishing about 2 weeks ago, and I said, hey, I'm going to have Josh on from Clutch Swim Baits because we're going to talk about the Eco, and it has to be in our Breaking the Mold series. And I asked them if they could hook you guys up with a good deal, and they said yes, obviously. So this is a deal that you will not find anywhere else. But just for you listening to this show right now, you can go to AmericanLegacyFishing.com where they're going to have Clutch Ecos in stock, and you can use code CLUTCH25. That's all one word, CLUTCH25, CLUTCH25, and that's going to unlock 25% off all Clutch Eco glide baits. So you add them to your cart, you use code CLUTCH25, and that takes this already insanely affordable, full resin, handmade glide bait. One of the main reasons why we're talking about this bait, because it is so affordable and so accessible to people, we're going to make it even more inexpensive. So instead of $95, you're going to get it for $71.25, and I cannot fully explain how insane of a deal that is. Words are not going to do it justice. This Clutch Eco that we're going to be talking about today in detail at $71 might be the deal of the century, and we're only doing it to help you out. Again, it goes without saying, whether 0 people buy this bait or 1,000 people buy this bait, I don't make a dime off of the sales of this bait, and if you guys go buy them or not. I'm only doing this because I understand that glide baits are expensive. That was one of the reasons why I never really got into glide baits until a couple years ago, because I was like, man, I can't afford these $200 baits, and I'm not going to have 5 baits in my box for $1,000, right? Who's going to do that? I understand that the cost or the barrier to entry to glide bait fishing is tough for a lot of people. So this is my best attempt to give you guys not only a killer show about a killer bait with a killer bait designer, but also give you the best deal that you're probably ever going to find on this bait itself, and try to make it as accessible as physically possible deal for the most number of people. So hopefully that's what we're going to do today. Again, for a limited time, first come, first serve. So I would jump on it. If you want to grab one, you can go over to American Legacy Fishing. You can use code CLUTCH25 for 25% off all Clutch Ecos. Again, AmericanLegacyFishing.com, code CLUTCH25. Okay, so we've told you who we're going to be talking to today. We've told you why we're going to be talking to him today. We've told you what bait we're going to be diving into, and we've even passed on what could quite possibly be the best deal ever on the bait that we're going to be talking about. So there's only one thing left to do, and that is for me to quit yapping and for us to get into this great conversation. So without further ado, let's jump into our full conversation with Clutch Swim Baits owner, founder, and lead designer, Josh PLADIES. All right, everybody, welcome back to Tackle Talk Podcast's Breaking the Mold series. Today, we are joined by Clutch Swim Baits owner and founder, Josh PLADIES. Josh, we really appreciate you stopping by the show today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been a fan of your podcast for years, it seems like, and it's cool to be on.
Well, we appreciate you stopping by. And I know I explained a little bit before we started recording here. Basically, over the next 4 weeks, we are talking to 4 individuals who own companies that we really think are, quote unquote, breaking the mold, right? You are doing things differently and uniquely. And each of you specifically has one bait that's really caught a lot of people's eye in the past year. But to back up, I think the first time I met you was probably 2 years ago at this point at the Columbus Fishing Expo. It's been a while, 2 or 3 years ago. And watching the growth that Clutch has had from that time to, seeing you like this year at the Bassmaster Classic at your booth and having one of the hottest selling glides of the year, like that growth has been so cool to see. But I don't know what your background is like before meeting you in Columbus. So how did you get started in the swim bait and the glide bait game in general?
Yeah. So, I've been throwing glide baits for years before I ever started making them. Started out with the old S waivers and stuff way back then, started out with the plastic and started getting more resin stuff. And the resin stuff used to be way more difficult to get. Like the good resin baits used to be way more difficult to get. They're much more readily available now, which I think is a great thing. You ask a bunch of other swim bait makers and they're like, I want my stuff to be hard to get. It's like, why? Like guys can actually get your stuff and throw it now. That's awesome. Because like I said, I used to be one of those guys that just tried to get a bait and could never get it. So it's awesome to finally kind of have swim baits at that point. But yeah, I've been throwing it for years. And actually, when I was getting into bass fishing, I was actually pretty close to Ned Cady, the guy that figured out the Ned rig.
Great dude.
The name with the Ned rig.
Yep.
He was a couple roads down from me in Topeka, Kansas. And everyone in Kansas was obsessed with the Ned rig. They're used to throwing little 3-inch plastics and just killing the smallmouth and largemouth and everything. And I was like, man, what happens if I throw something 8, 9, 10 inches behind them? And started getting a lot of fish and started getting a lot bigger fish as well. And I didn't have to throw a little tiny piece of do nothing plastic and stuff. So it was really cool to always kind of take that separate approach. And it just kind of grew from there. I'm kind of an obsessive compulsive person. So I started tinkering with stuff and all of a sudden a couple years later we're here. So
are you like that? Are you just a tinkerer by nature? Like I feel like a lot of the best bait makers or, people in the industry that I've met really just have that itch that they need to scratch all the time in the back where it's like, before you were making baits, just modding or changing little things to try and find one little difference. And then that leads to this sort of like career path of, I can actually make something completely different and unique. And this is now like my, job.
No, yeah, for sure. And swim baits is kind of what took off. And I don't necessarily see myself as just a swim bait maker. Like there's some of the prototypes I've been working on it's nothing swim bait related at all. It's just something that I think that we're missing in fishing right now. And there's a lot of failure there. And like a lot of those baits suck. Like I'd say probably maybe 10% of the baits I work on actually even remotely come close to going to market. That's a lot of failure. But that's how you make great things is just don't be afraid to suck. We got right over there, we got 2 3D printers and they're off right now because we're doing this, but they're always on, always going, always trying to do something new. So
before the 3D print game was like really a thing, though, I mean, back when you guys started, I'm sure it was a lot more like, oh, I'm hand carving these things.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to figure out, like, how did that whole process start? Were you like making baits for yourself and just trying to play around with, and then that became a company? Or did you start out one day and you're like, you know what? Not only do I want to make glide baits, I want to make a glide bait company.
I mean, it started out me just kind of making stuff for myself and buddies, and there was some ugly baits. Like the OG was originally a hand carved bait, which is crazy because I come from a CAD drafting background. Like I designed structural steel components for buildings before I did clutch full time, and like I'd done CAD for like a decade at that point, and it never dawned on me like, hey, maybe you should draw one of those up in CAD. But it was the programs I was used to using were more for more big things, like I said, buildings, steel, not necessarily like resin swim baits. So it kind of went from there, if that makes sense.
So now what is the process look like? Now is it pretty much like, hey, I've got this crazy idea in my head. I go to the CAD or I go to the 3D printer or whatever and start there?
And now it's 100% done with CAD and 3D printing. Like the OG was originally hand carved. And I just look, I mean, so when you hand carve something, like there's probably 20, 25 OGs before I finally got that one semi right. And it was still like wonky. It was still kind of misshapen a little bit. Now it's fixed, but for the longest time, like it had an ugly fin side. Like it wasn't perfect. And it's so hard to get a carving right. And then if you're like, well, I want to make it a little bit thinner in the belly, or I want to add a little bit more resin to the top of it to affect the buoyancy in this way. Like it's really hard to do when you're just kind of hand carving them and molding them with clay and everything. That's really hard to do, where I can just jump in CAD and just make a couple adjustments and we got a prototype in 2 days.
So the swim bait market and the glide bait market in general, like it's a weird market because I feel like, at least from an outsider looking in, like just a bass angler that buys these things every once in a while, I feel like glide bait companies especially fall in like two different categories. You are either like the most hyped up thing in the world, where dudes are on the internet, waiting for the clock to strike 6 o'clock and they've already got their stuff filled out to get on the drop and, get that bait before it sells out in 90 seconds. Or it's, you're not on the hype train at the moment and it's a little bit more of a grind. And it seems like there's hardly any middle ground, at least from outside looking in. You tell me if that's right or wrong, but do you feel like there's kind of like that, I don't know, dichotomy, I guess, in glide bait fishing and swim bait fishing as far as a company goes?
I've not necessarily looked at it as a dichotomy. I've looked at it more as a shift in the market. So like everything used to be that really hot, you got to be quick, you got to be fast, like you got to be right on there at the exact time, otherwise you're not going to get it. And just as times progress, like even the last 2-3 years, you've kind of seen this split start to happen. And the thing is, like those people that still treat their companies as like, oh, I want my stuff to be super hot, super fast to get, super hard to get. Like they're either one, only selling like 50 baits a year to make sure that they still have that hype behind them, or they're more readily available. So it's kind of like the people that are, in my opinion, I'm going to get grilled for this for sure, but like the people that are trying to make sure that their baits are like the most hot bait and like they sell out immediately, they're not doing what a company should. They're not taking care of their customers, in my opinion. Like if you have so much confidence that you make the best product out there to help someone fulfill what they need in fishing, and you're not letting them have the opportunity to get it because you make 50 a year, you're either not a business, you're just a hobby business at that point, or you don't care about your customers. That's my opinion. And I mean, that's why we make stuff readily available. I mean, like I said, I'm going to get grilled for that, but that's my approach. It's like, I think we make a bait I want people to be able to have because they're going to have success with it. I want to make sure that people can get it.
I'll take a turn getting grilled here then too, for sure. I think that the people that seek those baits out, that really, really want I have this and no one else, they're just the fishing version of a hipster. Like you just want it because your friend doesn't have it. You're like, oh, once everybody else has it, it's not cool anymore. You got to move on to the next thing. It's just a status symbol, right? Is really all it is. It's not this thing will outfish my buddy right beside me. It's I have this and you don't. And to your point, right? If you want to build a great company and truly help more people catch more fish, then you need to make your product more readily available. You need to, refine your production side of things and grow and scale. And some of these companies, that's why like you said, they make 12 baits a year, and that's why people line up and lose their mind over them. But they're never going to be that big success that's helping a lot of people across the country catch fish.
Yeah, I mean, if they help those 12 people that get their baits catch their PB, more power to them. That's if that's how you want to run your company that way for sure. But like I said, before I started making baits, I was going after all the hype stuff. Like I wanted some Hinkle shads, I wanted Hinkle trouts, I wanted legends, all that stuff, and it was just I couldn't get my hands on it. And it's like, well, what good's that do me? And if I'm like, I came kind of more from a tournament background. It's like, look, if I've got to rely on that thing for a tournament and I lose it, what now?
Yeah,
I can't. I can't do well on that. I can't trust your product because I can't get another one.
And you're starting to see at least some companies that used to be super hard to get are taking the route too of trying to make them more available. And I do respect that too. There are a lot of others out there that are, it's the KGBs of the world and folks too, that more stuff is on the website than used to be. And it's a little bit more easily available than it used to be. And I think it's a great thing for fishing in general for people like me and you and the people listening to this that truly just want the bait to catch fish. I'm not in it for, to put it on my pegboard and show my buddies when they walk in and, ooh, look what I have. It's like, no, I want to go catch my PB smallmouth on it.
Yeah, exactly. You're not trying to impress people by the front and back pictures.
That's what I love about Clutch in general is like you have kind of, at least for me, what I think, and I'll ask you what you think it is in a second, but when I think of Clutch swim baits, when I think of your calling card of what makes a Clutch swim bait, I love the fact that it is like, it's almost no frills. Like it's all performance seemingly, and it's less about like the super flashy paint job or what looks good on the shelf. It's like, no, I'm making this to be a functional, versatile, swim bait out on the water and help you catch fish. You tell me, like when someone asks you what is Clutch, what do you think your calling card is?
It's performance based. Like I want something, I don't care what it looks like. If it catches a bass better than any other swim bait out there, I want to throw that one. Like the Boss, for example, that's gotten called a wonky looking bait by a lot of people, but I would put that bait up against any other bait, especially in a forward facing sonar category. Like if a bait that's 9 3/4 to 10-inch range, I have no doubt in my mind that bait will outperform anything else in its category. I've seen it happen too much. I've been in boats with other people throwing other baits, and it's just the Boss always wins against those ones. And it's just because we've refined it over and over and over again. Like we had 32 different designs of that thing before we came out with the first one. And now we've revised it a couple more times, just kind of like tinkering with little things, trying to make it so like, okay, if that thing's down 10, 15 feet, if I hit it really, really hard, is it going to blow out? Like forward facing sonar has been a huge help with that. Like a lot of people cuss it and don't like it, but like the thing is, like if I'm working a bait and I've got that fish's attention and he's closing in, if I do something squirrely to like mess with him, I can see that. I can see what he didn't like. Yeah. So it's like, all right, well, if I manipulate the tail thickness by 2% and that's going to make it kind of shoot out a little bit more level and that fish commits more, well, that bait's better than it was before. So like now we're up to like 40, 45 revisions, something like that. And some of those never make it to production, but at least I tested it and I know.
So like with revisions, like, I mean, when I see a lot of things, it's like, oh, I see tank swim videos and stuff like that too. And that's obviously an important part of it, but you kind of bring up a really good point that I probably hadn't really thought too much of. It's like, you can only do so much in a tank. You can only do so much in the swim tank in the shop. And I do need to see, what turns fish off, what turns fish on, what makes them commit, what makes them, like I said, peel away a little bit. And forward-facing sonar at least is letting you do that, where even if you could do that in the past, it was with a tanked fish, and those fish can be trained, and those fish are not in their natural habitat, and you can't get enough data on enough fish because you only have, so many fish that are in the tank that you can play around with too, and they all have their own personalities and stuff. So how much of your testing happens in shop versus on water?
It's going to sound a lot more like it's in shop just because if I see like a lot of baits won't even make it to the water. Like they've got to perform right in order to make it out to the water. But I'd say a lot, like once I feel like a bait performs well, then it's like, okay, it's got to go through its paces. Like what? So for example, when's this coming out?
Probably about 4 weeks from now.
Okay, let's release it. So we're going to release it right before the East Tennessee Fishing Expo, but we've got a baby Boss coming. Ooh. So it's a little bit smaller version. There's always been a baby Boss. It's never been good. Like it's so thin that it's not a good bait. Well, I've been working on it, and I've really been hitting it hard since March. And I finally got it right. Like, I'm not a good tournament fisherman, but like I did very well. And almost all my fish came on this bait this year. It's wild how well this one works. Everyone that I've gotten in their hands of is just like, this bait is insane.
What's it come in lengthwise?
It's right around 8 1/4. So okay. It's a little bit bigger than the OG, but much, much thinner. It's going to, the tournament guys are going to absolutely love this bait. It's insane. But like that thing, if you threw earlier revisions in the tank out in the shop, it looks great. But once you get it on the water, it's like, well, I don't like that much. I don't like that much. And like, it just constantly come back and have to do different revisions. But yeah, we finally got it.
So I guess probably like a CAD background and an engineering background helps a little bit here too. But how hard is it to diagnose? Like if you see something out of the water, you're like, ooh, I don't like how, that jutted out to the right on this particular motion or something, or how it kind of turned, 12 degrees onto its side when I did this or whatever. Yeah. How hard is it to diagnose? I mean, you can see the problem, but how to fix it in terms of bait design?
That's more of an experience thing. Cause like I'm still learning. I'm constantly getting better at this. Like this baby boss taught me so much that I'm now going back and applying it to the Eco, applying it to the OG, applying it to the Darter, and figuring out different ways to kind of make them swim better as well. So, like I said, I'm constantly learning. I have my own theories of why a bait. Sorry about that. Phone's going off. Yeah, I've got my own different theories about what different weightings and different locations do to a bait, how it performs differently, like what my own principles. And I'm constantly checking them, trying to break them, trying to establish new ones. And that's kind of, every bait teaches me something. Every bait that we come out with always gives me something that I'm able to take back and apply to everything else.
All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first, the Tackle Talk podcast and Breaking the Mold are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Now, whether you're trying to power a full RV for off-the-grid camping or basic fishing electronics or trolling motors, there's only one battery that I've relied on for the past 2 years, and it's Dakota Lithium. Dakota Lithium packs award-winning power and capacity into some of the smallest and lightest lithium batteries on the planet. Whether you need a 12-volt, 24-volt, 36-volt, 48-volt, even a 72-volt, everything from 10 amp-hour to 320 amp-hour, Dakota Lithium has you covered. They're lighter, smaller, they charge faster, they last longer, and they have a rock-solid 11-year warranty standard. So if you want to try out your own Dakota Lithium battery and see the difference for yourself, you can head over to www.dakotalithium.com and listen up, because we have an even better brand new code for you to use from here on out as well for Dakota Lithium. That's code TACKLETALK5 FS, like free shipping. So that is all one word, Tackle Talk, the number 5, F as in free, and S as in shipping. That's going to save you 5% off your entire battery purchase and give you free shipping on that entire purchase. And free shipping makes a huge difference, because shipping on batteries is pretty expensive, but not anymore. As a Tackle Talk listener, you're going to save 5% and you're going to get free shipping, which means just the shipping alone is anywhere from like a $30 to $100 savings on top of your 5% off. So again, be sure to use code TACKLETALK5FS. That's going to help you save even more money with Dakota Lithium moving forward. Be sure to use that code because it helps Dakota Lithium know that we sent you, it helps us here at the show, and it helps you save a ton of money. It's a win-win for everybody. So go check them out, www.dakotalithium.com, and use the new code TACKLETALK5FS. Well, you name dropped the bait that I really wanted to talk to you about today. And obviously, when we talk about the people that I think traditionally listen to Tackle Talk, I think you have a bait in your lineup that just, again, scratches an itch that very few people are able to hit correctly. It's a hole in the glide bait market, I think, and it is the Clutch Eco. So the Clutch Eco I have thrown for the better part of a year now. I've put it through a lot of different situations, and I've been thoroughly impressed with it, not just because of its price, but That's obviously a big part of this thing too. So you have made a true resin glide bait, single jointed glide bait, comes in just over 6 inches, I think like 6.25, and it comes in at $95 MSRP. So under $100 for a true hand-built resin glide bait. So first question as far as the Eco goes is, why was this bait born? Was this like, I want to hit a certain price point because I see an opportunity there? Or was it, no, I'm going to go, I just have this idea for like a certain size or a certain performance metric and the price came afterwards?
So this one, almost all of our baits are designed for a specific purpose. And typically that's a fishing purpose. Like that one was the Eco when we first started it was kind of in the fall, and the bass were really kind of honed in on a lot smaller bait. And I know kind of like really small glide baits are kind of becoming a big thing right now. And I don't really see much of a reason to go much smaller than a 6-incher. Like I don't think like there's better tools if you go shorter than 6. Like 6 has still got that drawing power. So that's kind of like where it started. And then it just kind of morphed from there. We're kind of like looking at it and like, man, how can we make this more efficient to produce so we can bring down the price tag? Like, and how do we kind of, it was almost a market shop kind of thing that we were kind of, we ended up going for. It was kind of a, not really a happy accident, but like from a strategy standpoint, we thought kind of having something to shock the market was going to help us out. Yeah. And that's kind of, it eventually evolved to that. Now, like the painting process, like that thing, you said you've been throwing it for a year. I bet it doesn't look too bad at all.
Nope. It looks almost the exact same as when I bought it.
Yeah. They take a ton of abuse. And that took a long time for us to figure out the efficiency standpoint behind that. So it was something it was just me and Billy, my shop manager at this point. It was just us two working at that point. We were just like, man, how do we challenge ourselves? How do we figure out something that's not been done before and do that? And there was many, many times we thought we were going to quit during that process, but we figured it out.
So how long was the development process, like from start to finish for the Eco? Because I mean, you talked about, what was it, the Boss earlier, 32 iterations of this thing and going back and forth. And I know just from what I've read, like just the paint scheme alone and like being able to obviously bake in the paint, which we'll get to in a little bit, like that took a long time. So from start to finish, how long from like idea of Eco until final product came out do you think it was?
That one was probably shorter compared to the Boss. That one was probably 8 to 10 months, somewhere right there.
Still a long time.
It wasn't too bad. It's a long time still, but like it took us a long time, and probably the last 3-4 months were us just trying to figure out the paint, trying to figure out how to make it look good.
Okay, so I want to get nerdy with this if you're okay with it. I want to go like piece by piece on this Eco because I really think, and we're going to talk about this a lot during this whole series that we're doing here on this 4-part, but a lot of these baits are like, it's the sum of their parts are what make them special. And some baits more than others. I think glide baits, there's a lot that makes it unique. The first, I guess, the resin itself. Talk to me. I'm an idiot when it comes to like truly what goes into the materials of a glide bait. I just know obviously it's resin. You mix it up, you pour it in the mold, and you're good. Is the resin in this different than the resin in a Boss or an OG? And what does the process look like to actually perfect the raw material that goes into the mold before you even start messing with components and weighting and stuff like that?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm a raw materials nerd. It's just like cooking. Like if you start with bad ingredients, you're going to have a subpar product. Like, but if you take that recipe and get like super high end ingredients, that stuff's going to come out like your food's going to come out so much better than if you just went with a great value brand. Now, to most people, they probably wouldn't know necessarily the difference, but I know. And so basically we've tested pretty much every single resin out on the market, and different ones are going to have different properties. There's different ones that are more buoyant than others. There's ones that microbloons are already mixed in with it. And there's that one particular one aside, all the other resins, there's different ones that have different buoyancies kind of naturally, how much air gets baked into the resin, and all that's going to affect it. Microbloons, not all microbloons are created equally. I want to say the 3M catalog has like 70, 80 different kinds of microbloons.
Okay, what's it for Dum Dum here? What's a microbloon?
A microballoon is an additive that we add to resin in order to make it float. So the natural buoyancy of resin sinks, but like when you add the microballoons to it, it floats. And basically, once you kind of have your microballoons figured out, different ones are going to be able to have different mixed viscosities. Like you can add more to different resins in order to run a higher percentage.
So this is your version of like the opposite of adding salt to a soft plastic, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So like Yamamoto runs a really, really salt-rich bait. Well, if you do that with resin, the downside is the more microballoons you add, the more fragile the resin's going to get. So the more like snap and break. But like the reason why we went so hard and so deep on the different materials that we use is because we wanted to run a higher percentage microballoon ratio without sacrificing durability. And that was something that was kind of, it was a pain to figure out for sure. And like there's different microballoons that when you mix them all together, it's more viscous, it's less viscous, like your working times are different. Like there's all these different factors that go into it. And to be honest, probably 95% of bait makers don't think anything of it. They just use the standard stuff that they saw on a YouTube video and go with it and think of it as gospel. But like, yeah, we went super deep on that stuff to figure out exactly what works for us to create the best bait possible. And yeah, basically that's kind of what it goes down to.
That's awesome. Because yeah, again, me, simpleton, I'd be like, oh yeah, you just mixed 1 part this, 2 parts this, and you have resin and it gets hard. And now let's work on drilling holes and putting weighting in and stuff like that. And I guess it's just a lot of that stuff that happens behind the scenes that a lot of us cynically just look at and go, I could do that. Right? I could get a mold and I could pour that and I could make a glide bait and put a weight in the front if it's too back heavy, or put a weight in the back if it's too front heavy, and there you go. It's like, no, there's so much that goes into
the thing is, it's not hard to make a swim bait swim.
Yeah. It's
really hard to make one swim right and to be good and then be able to do it at scale. That's really hard. But yeah, I mean, if you get a piece of wood, you make it sink and you cut a joint in it and you twitch your rod, it's going to do that in the water. But like, it's not the action that you're wanting. So yeah, it's taking it to that next level and really pushing that stuff. And like, okay, well, I don't want it to do that. How do I not make it do that anymore? And then over time you figure it out.
So what about the color then? Because you hinted that like the color of these things was hard to get right. So first off, again, we talked about it earlier. One of your big calling cards, I think, is like you don't put a ton of time into these elaborate paint jobs because, I mean, I'm a pretty good example of this. I think my favorite color of glide is just bone. Like, and that's a lot of people's. It's just give me a bone glide bait, throw it out in the sun for a little bit, let it get that kind of like, yellowy tint to it, and it's got the good mojo in it, and it's good to go. So I love the fact that like these are, yes, you've got a different color on the top depending on which one you're doing, whether it's gizzard. I got the purple back one, but there probably is a little bit of a clear coat on this, but almost nothing, right? It's basically just, okay, so it's just the resin that's on there. Why did it take so long for you to get the paint right on this? And I guess second question would be, I kind of look at that as like an oxymoron, right? Because there's not a lot of paint to try and protect. So why was it so important to you to protect what little paint you did have on these?
It's just, it's one of those things where like, okay, so there's different durabilities and everything with the paint. Like there's more than one, like I'm trying to figure out how to say it without giving the whole farm away, because like there's a lot of people that think they know what we're doing out there, but they really don't. And we're going to come out with some stuff this year to kind of really mess with them. It's going to be kind of fun from my perspective. Like I said, everyone thinks that we're doing one thing, but we're really doing something else. And it's like, all right, let's throw them a curveball here.
Watch this. Yeah.
But, yeah, exactly. So I don't want to give the farm away on that, but basically it's trying to like efficiency was super important. Durability was everything, where it's like, all right, how do we make the most durable bait possible that's never going to chip? And 3, like if we did any sort of clear coat at all, that immediately is something else that can go wrong. It's hard to scale at that point, and it's a bunch of time and it's a bunch of extra raw materials. So it's like, well, if we could just eliminate clear coat altogether, perfect. So we kind of started doing that. We started going down that rabbit hole, and it's like, all right, what if we tried doing this style of production? And we kind of started messing with a bunch of different paints for that. And it took us a long time to figure out what we landed on there. A lot of trips to the hardware store, a lot of trips to Hobby Lobby.
So again, I don't want to ask you to give too much away here, but then is there a future where you're trying to bring what you did with the Eco to your other baits in terms of that durability, or does it not work because of the different resins you have to make? Like, is this truly have to be unique to the Eco, or can it be spread throughout your line?
it can be spread throughout the line, and we've talked about doing that before. The only issue is it kind of that paint when you apply it. So if you have two baits side by side, and this is solely a business thing, if you have two baits side by side, like the eco has to be in a different case than a clear coated bait, because if you put them like side by side like that and trying to sell them side by side, that eco paint just doesn't look as good. It doesn't look as finished. Now don't get me wrong, it's great bait. It's bit really, really well. To the fish, it doesn't matter. But from a sales perspective, side by side, a customer is going to look at the eco paint and just be like, I'm not a huge fan of that. So like it just, yeah, if we've got a boss in the exact same paint scheme with one with clear coat and one eco paint, it's just, it doesn't look professional, basically, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
I personally have some and I throw them, but yeah.
So last dumb question about this process then. So maybe this is starting to make sense. Does the process that you're using to protect the paint also just protect the integrity of the entire bait so that you don't have to use a clear coat? No.
They're independent.
So you could make like, your bosses or your OGs and not put a clear coat on them, and the resin itself is going to be just as durable as this is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So it truly is on the paint then.
Yeah,
okay.
You asked that question earlier, and I guess I just skirted around it. It's the same resin. It's just we went through a huge process to figure out what resin works best for us, and then we applied it across the board. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So some next things, if we want to go down this bait. So next, at the price point, you have rotating treble hangers. So for someone that's just getting into, swim baits or glide baits, why is that important? And I think that's really unique that it comes at a bait at this price point, obviously.
Yeah, it eliminates leverage. It's one less thing that can so basically if you've just got a stationary hook hanger on there and a split ring and a hook, you can only rotate it so far before it just pulls out. And rotating hook hangers that fish can spin and spiral in circles when you're bringing it in, and it's not going to get to that point of leverage and toss it. And I know that the biggest, it's not even a drawback because it's never been an issue, but there's some guys out there, and typically they work for other bait companies. They don't like the rotating hook hangers because it looks weaker than a stationary
It's one more fail point. Yeah, like that could be, right? Air quotes. Yeah.
I've never had one fail.
I've never either.
Never once. And I don't know. People are going to not like it. It's literally the exact same amount of time, exact same amount of effort to do a rotating hook hanger as it is a stationary hook hanger. Like, why would you not?
Is this really going to be the weakest point between you and the fish? Like your line is probably going to snap before that. If you're using a decoy snap or something, that might snap before that. Like this is probably not going to be the completely weakest portion between you and that fish.
I've tested it so much. I've had half of the rotating hook hanger. We've had a messed up bait where we cast it wrong, and it was cast with that part of that rotating hook hanger almost completely out. Like barely little was hanging on to the resin. And I think the biggest one I boat flipped on that was 7.5, and the thing didn't. It's okay, it looked as weak as it could possibly look, and I still boat flipped a 7.5 pounder and it didn't move. At that point, if you're trying to make that argument where a normal screw eye is better, you're grabbing at straws at that point, in my opinion.
So then the hook that's on that hook hanger, also equally important. This was something that blew my mind when I first got into glide baits and swim baits, is how big of a difference different hooks can make on the exact same bait and how touchy these baits are. And it's a hats off to you and anybody else that designs them, is because this bait is designed for the hooks that come on it stock. Obviously, that's the way that you've created this thing and you've tested it. Not to say that you can't mod it, because you certainly can, and it'll do some cool different things if you add different hooks. But as far as the stock hooks that come on these baits, what are they? What size are they? And then what happens if you change these a little bit?
So there's been a couple hooks that we've done stock on the Eco, trying to find the right one. And it's just us trying to find that right one that fits. I think the one you had there was originally a size 2 VMC. That's one of the very first run Ecos that we've done.
Yep.
And then for the longest time, we used Mustad triple grip size 2, the little short ones. And I'm not a huge fan of the triple grips, but the problem with the Eco is it's such a small bait. It had to have a short shank hook. There's very, very few short shank hooks out there in a size 2 that are good. I personally like the VMCs, but now we've actually got BKK making us a custom hook for that bait. So it's a short shank, round bend, super. I don't want to say super stout because it's not. It's you don't have to drive the hook home or anything. Like you just lean into it, but it's the right hook now. It's super sharp. It's a really good hook. And I've been trying to get them to let us sell them, but they, for whatever reason, won't let us sell like replacements for them. And it's a custom hook. So if guys need replacements, I kind of tell them to go to that Mustad size 2 short shank until I can get this figured out with BKK where we can actually sell the backup hooks that we're putting on there, because those are really, really good hooks.
Yeah, BKK is great. I got hip to BKK about 2 years ago, and back then they were very under the radar, and now they're starting to like make a big breakout for good reason. It's crazy that I can flash this to you and you can tell exactly when this Eco was basically made just by a quick flash of the camera. I know if people listening can't see that, but I mean, I held it up for half a second and put it down. He's like, oh, it's one of the first ones we ever made. I can tell by that hook. I couldn't even basically see the hook. Yeah, I got this I actually had Kevin Baxter pick this up for me at the East Tennessee show last year, I think it was. I was like, dude, can you please just swing by and grab me one of those? I don't care what color it is. Just grab one, mail it to me. I'll pay you. He's like, I got you. So that's awesome.
It's crazy. Like there's little intricacies that I can kind of tell, like, all right, that boss was made in this batch a couple years ago here. Like OGs, same way. Like everything I can tell, like approximately when it was made, and be like, all right, if there was an issue at this point in time, like that's okay. That was that batch. We're good. We can look forward on that one. But I guess do it long enough, you notice the subtle little intricacies.
They're your babies, yeah. You know them.
Yeah, exactly.
So with the hooks then, if I switch to, a 1 or a 3 or different size hooks, what does it do to this bait? And do you see anybody doing anything kind of unique in terms of different hooks on them?
So is how big of a rabbit hole do we want to go down here? Different size hooks are going to affect the weighting quite a bit. You obviously don't want to put a bigger one on the back as opposed to the front. Like that thing's going to start running wonky. If you're going to add weight to it, you definitely want to add a little bit more to the head than the tail. And that's true with pretty much every glide bait across the board. If you put too much weight on the tail, your baits, it's going to run weird. But increasing hook size, like I know some of the guys in Texas kind of like to do that. They got giant fish down there. Northern pike and muskie fishermen do the same thing. It's not going to affect it too much. It's going to make it sink a little bit faster. If you go light or smaller hooks, it's going to make it float a little bit more or not sink as fast. It's just kind of dealer's choice on that. Like thinner wire, you're going to have better hook penetration, but you're also going to potentially bend them out more. If you got stouter hooks, it's going to be harder to get a hook driven home, but it's going to be solid. So yeah, I mean, I play with hooks from time to time, but like on the Eco, the BKKs that we have made, they're the best hook I've found in that size for it. And then on our other stuff, we use BKK Spear 21s, and that is a bad little hook right there. They're so good.
So some people, if this is like their first glide bait that they're splurging on, they're actually going to try some. There's going to be some questions that pop up about this in general. So like first, you look at the underside of this bait, right? There's other holes that are kind of like, probably 3 of them, I think. Yeah, 1, 2, 3 that are poked under there. What are those from, or what purpose do they serve when someone's looking at this and going, oh, it looks like there's extra holes in here?
Yeah, so that was how we kind of suspended some of our ballast weights into the bait. It's on the OG, the darter, the boss, all of our clear coated baits. We spend the extra time to fill those, make it blend in with the bottom as good as we can. On the Eco, it was all about like we were talking about earlier, trying to bring something under $95. So it's like, well, we try to cut out all the aesthetic fluff that's typically added to a glide bait and make it so like, okay, if you want those filled and you want it clear coated and everything, okay, that bait all of a sudden becomes $105, $110, $115, just starts stepping up. So we wanted to bring the most affordable bait we could possible by not sacrificing any of the fish catching qualities that make that bait good.
Yeah, it's purely aesthetic.
That doesn't matter. Yeah.
So one of the questions that I had when I first started with glides, and I got a couple of my first ones, like, oh, they didn't really trim this centering pin down very well. That's in the middle of the bait. Yeah. You leave those up on purpose. So if you actually get a glide, you're going to see like a sharp centering pin that's going to stick out in there. What is the purpose of leaving that up?
So we leave that up so that you can kind of get at the pins in there. So if you rotate them clockwise, it's going to drive them into the bait more, and it's going to close that joint. The more tight the joint, the more wide that glide's going to be. And if you back them out, it's going to make it a lot more choppy. And it's going to kind of more walk in place a little bit. So it's just kind of that pin sticking up on the back just adds a layer of customization to the bait that is good.
I think a lot of people don't realize too, like how not customizable, right? But how much you can tinker with these things and you can make it the bait that you want. Like the way that it comes in terms of the angle of the tail is not the end all be all of that bait. You can make it go wider. You can make it stay choppier to the point where I've actually got a couple different ones here. So like this is the Eco and this is like a Taxi Shad, right? And this is how they come in terms of the angle of those baits. So yours come, at least when I got it, right? It's almost a 90-degree turn. This thing can chop so well. It's got a huge range of motion there. Not to say I can't go in there and, tune those down if I wanted to stay less, but it's really cool to see the difference in different baits and really what, you settle on. How did you settle on having such a wide range of motion on this Eco?
So the baits that are kind of have that more restricted tail, they tend to have that little bit wider, smooth glide look to it. And I personally feel like a lot of that can be affected by the weighting. You can make a bait act wider and smoother with proper weighting. Not saying that they have their weighting wrong, because they make good baits as well. But I tend to kind of like to have that freedom in the bait where I can get really aggressive with it. And if I slow it down and kind of work it nice and slow, I can still get a really nice glide out of it. Yeah. So personally, I tend to make them a little bit more of aggressive angle just because let me try to figure out how to explain that. It's easier to make a choppy bait act like a slower glide than it is to make a slower glide act like a choppy bait. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
From my perspective. So yeah, that's kind of why we kind of go more choppy. Like the Boss has got a little bit more restricted. It's not that restricted, but it's more restricted than the Eco, basically.
So line tie wise, why do almost all glide baits have a horizontal line tie versus a vertical line tie? Is it just to kind of give you more of like my brain goes to, if it was a vertical line tie and it was even just a little bit off center, that bait's going to run wonky. Where if it's a horizontal line tie, you've got more room to play on each side. That's where my brain goes. But do you know why every single glide bait that I ever own basically has a horizontal line tie?
I think it's just because everyone does it.
Okay. It's not really a big to do.
I've tried vertical and it's literally had no effect on it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've never even like if this is a bait right here, like, and that's your line tie there. If it's off the side, that doesn't even matter that much.
Interesting.
That does very, very little to the performance of the bait. Now, what matters is I don't even have a glide bait here. How sad is that? Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
All right, we're teasing stuff. Let's tease it.
All right.
So baby Boss.
Ooh,
the new ones have a little bit bigger eye to them. But so you can see the line tie is very unnaturally high on this thing. The vertical location of a line tie is everything. Like if that's off, like moved by a millimeter, that bait's going to be a completely different bait. But if you move it this way at all, it doesn't make much of a difference at all.
Is there a world where, like, again, I don't know, is there a world where there's multiple line ties on a glide bait and you can hook it to a different one and it acts completely different? Or is it going to be trash?
Some of my prototypes have had that.
Okay, interesting. Because that's something fun to play with, right? It's like, it's kind of like, like when you're throwing a blade bait or something, it's got 3 or 4 different holes on the back. If you want it to, run higher or lower, you want it more vibration or less vibration. Is there a world where there's a modular line tie?
So maybe, but typically, like if on the baby Boss and the Boss in general, if that line tie's in a different position, it
sucks.
It doesn't swim well. So like on the Boss in particular, if that line tie gets lowered, like if it's even 2 millimeters to down there lower, that bait's going to get really tippy. Like it's going to have a lot more roll to it. Higher, like the line tie on this bait could potentially go a little bit higher. And I guess we'll give away some juice if there's any bait makers out there. So in my experience, the location of the line tie is more critical to the central location of the buoyancy of the bait as opposed to just the aesthetic and overall shape of it. So basically what I mean by the central points of buoyancy. So like the Boss, Baby Boss, and Darter, most of my baits in general have a more wide top than they do down low. I guess I could grab a competitor's bait, but you'll see.
Yeah,
like
I've got some right beside me.
Yeah. A lot of other people's glide baits carry their thickness lower in the bait. Like say a phony shack, their line tie is really low on the bait, but if you look at it, they carry so much buoyancy down low. And I get why they're trying to hide the weights that are cast in there. They're trying to make their job easier. And I don't doubt that. Like we have to do certain things to our weights in order to get them to fit in the bait and not show. But that's why their line ties are so low, is because they have to be lower. Otherwise, their stuff's going to start to wobble a lot more too. Now, I mean, obviously, there's some glide baits that I think that they've got their line ties in completely the wrong spot, whatever. But but that's why ours are so in such a weird position, because we figured out this recipe that kind of allows us to kind of cheat and put our buoyancy higher on a bait, which allows for a thinner belly, which in my opinion gets more bites. I think a thinner bait is going to get a lot more bites than a thick bait.
Interesting. So yeah, all because of a line tie and where it is in millimeters difference. This is the stuff where, again, it's easy for us as armchair quarterbacks to sit here and be like, I could make a Lego mold and I could sell these things for $250 a piece and we'd be rich. We'd do a drop and we'd sell 200 of them and we're good for 6 months. Like, it's not quite that easy. There's so much that goes into these things, and there's such a fickle little bait that something so small as having your line tie a millimeter in the wrong spot or your central point of buoyancy off just a little bit, and you're like, now this bait sucks.
Yeah, like if you're okay, and this is another reason for why CAD's so good, because I can make a perfectly symmetrical bait every time. If you're hand carving this thing and you had a little bit more of a bulbous right here, well, that throws everything off. It's like now, like your weighting's going to be messed up. Like it might have a little bit of weird bubble in the water, or while you're swimming it might hit the kind of corner a little bit weird on one side. Like that's why, in my opinion, CAD's so important, is because I can make this geometrically perfect every time I pour bait.
So then, as far as like the pound test line and like what you're designing these baits to be thrown on, is there like a perfect scenario where like, okay, I designed this bait with 20-pound fluoro in mind, or is it a little bit more wide reaching than that?
Yeah, I try to design everything with 20-pound test in mind, except for I used to say that for the Eco as well, but it just performs so much better on 15 to 17 than 20. I used to throw Eco on a TAT 300 and 20-pound mono, and like I switched to a Tatula 200 on a 7.3-1 with 15-pound fluoro, and it's just like it opened it up so much more. And a lot of that comes down to like the resistance of the line coming through the water. Like the thicker the line, the more water it's got to move to get through the water, and the thinner the line, the more it can kind of cut through. But yeah, I
found that out too. Just happy accident is I like throwing it more on what is kind of like my heavier chatterbait setup than my traditional big glide setup. And that's why it's got 15-pound fluoro on it, and it's just a tiny bit whippier of a rod, and it just sets up for that Eco so much better than my big, beefy, like the same thing I'm throwing 7 and 8 inch glides on.
Yeah, and that's true with any smaller glide bait. Is like if you can overpower it so easy. Like if you throw in a big reel that's got a lot of power to it, you can power it so much, and that bait can come up to the surface a little bit more.
It just blows out a little bit because you're just putting too much torque behind it.
If you're having an issue with any sort of smaller glide like that, switch from a 300 to a 200 or a 150 size reel, and it's going to help you out.
So then, as far as like the Eco in general, when someone asks you like, hey, where does the Eco shine? Where does the Eco sit in your line or your arsenal of baits? What really do you think that this does better than anything else that you have?
So there's a lot of times where fish will get on a lot smaller bait. Like if they're eating thread fins, it's the Eco all day long. Also sinking it over brush piles and stuff. If I'm on a fishery that's got smaller fish, I'll kind of tend to go more that direction. It's kind of one of those things where like I'll start on the extremes. I'll have both an Eco and a Boss on my front deck, and I will sample them both. Just kind of give them a little bit of everything. And if they're leaning towards the Boss more, I'll kind of lean towards bigger baits that day. If they're leaning towards the Eco, I'll kind of lean towards that smaller stuff. So it kind of gives me a good starting point throughout the day. Cause there's sometimes like you go on the water and it's like, man, I've been throwing this big bait all day and like I haven't had much of any action. And it's like, well, second you switch to something a little bit smaller, like all of a sudden it just opens up the whole thing. So like it's kind of where I start. Like I said, I'll start with both.
Yeah, this is, at least for me, this has become like my favorite quick, choppy, shallow water glide.
Yeah.
For sure. Like I'm throwing this thing in creeks, dude. I'm throwing this thing all over the place, small water. And it really is like, it is just that, yes, I can still take it out and I can work it a lot slower or work it parallel to that lay down or whatever. And that's fine. But just the open water, shallow, chop, going fast. Like this thing is a beast and it's awesome. And it gets bit so much because of its size.
Yeah, it also skips fairly decent too.
Yes, it does.
Not decent, but you can
for a glide it does. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And you can bang it up against bridge pylons or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like you're not hurting this thing. So I will throw it in places where I would be scared to throw a much more delicate, big, expensive glide bait or whatever. It's like, dude, you can throw this thing up against the rustiest train bridge pylons and smack it as hard as you want. You're not hurting it.
I've had some people break them. But they hit it really, really hard. They've casted really hard at it.
Well, this poor thing has been sent like Mach 10 at a bunch of different bridges, and it's been fine.
It's you got to hit it hard, and you have to hit it just right. Like that thing's got to hit just like basically. If you take a ton of shock to that pin on the back, like if you try to hit that pin down, it doesn't like that too much because it's like a single, like basically a chiseling into the resin. It won't like that too much. But like, yeah, you can hit some stuff with it.
But like I've had impacts with this thing where some of my other baits would have looked like a cheese grater just went down the side of them. And this thing, it looks like it did coming out of the package.
Oh yeah. Bounce it off some rocks. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, again, before we let you go here, if anybody is interested in picking these up, where can they go? Because again, for a $95 MSRP, this thing is a beast. And if you're interested in getting into glide baits, but you don't want to take that $150, $200, $225 dip in the pool yet, but you're past the Arashi glides of the world, the S waivers of the world, and you want to kind of start to dip your toes, I think this is a perfect like gateway glide bait where it really gets people into, and you're not sacrificing quality on this thing. This is not like a, I was too cheap, so I'll get something that, I might use for 6 months and then I'll upgrade. It's like, this is something that you can use forever. This is just as good as some of my glide baits that cost twice as much.
Oh yeah, for sure. But so they're available. We work with a lot of retailers. A lot of your bigger ones have them. Tackle Warehouse, Omnia, Lake Pro Tackle. I believe you work with American Legacy Fishing. They've been carrying some Ecos.
Yep.
We try to make them available as much as possible to a broad reach of retailers. We have a area on our website that's kind of dedicated to our retailers, where if you click on them, it'll take you to our product homepage on their website. And coming in 2025, we're going to try to have some unique colored ones available up on the website. So we'll try to do some cool stuff from that standpoint too. So
that's awesome. Well, we appreciate you stopping by again. Thank you. A tip of the hat for making a true like working man's glide bait and something that us regular dudes can afford. So interested in picking them up, check out any of the retailers he mentioned, but that is Josh PLADIES from Clutch Swim Baits. Josh, thank you so much for stopping by, man.
I appreciate it, Andrew. Thanks for having me. Like I said, I've been a fan for a long time. I'm happy to finally be on. It's great.
Awesome. Thanks, dude.
Yep, we'll see you.
All right, everybody, that concludes episode 2 of Breaking the Mold Volume 2. We really appreciate Josh stopping by and taking some time to talk with us about Clutch Swim Baits, about his design and thought process, about what makes Clutch Swim Baits so unique, and what makes, in particular, the Clutch Eco so impressive. And you can take my word for it, right? I have a Clutch Eco that I use very, very often, and very similar to last week's episode with the Battle Baits minigun, the Clutch Eco is a bait that I have not hit the water without since I bought it last spring. It's a permanent staple in my arsenal and in my box, and the first glide bait that I seem to reach for when I'm looking for that slightly downsized profile compared to my other glides, or if I'm just around smaller bait, or if I'm looking for a good choppy action, which just gets annihilated around here, especially in shallow water. But I can also adjust this thing to work it much wider and slower. It's tuned great. It's durable as probably physically possible. possible for a glide bait. And you guys know me, I abuse my gear, and this thing is an absolute tank. You basically can't chip the paint with that proprietary kind of paint method that they have where they bake that paint into the resin. It has rotating trebles on it. It has great hardware. Just a fantastic, unique, high-performing glide bait at a price that, especially with the discount that we're able to provide you all with today, is like a third to a half the price of comparable baits. So just a reminder, if you want to grab a Clutch Eco, we do have a deal that will save you some money so you don't have to pay full retail price for a very limited time. First come, first serve. Don't sleep on it. It's over at AmericanLegacyFishing.com, and they have Clutch Ecos on the website right now. And at our request, they have implemented code CLUTCH25 to save you 25% off this Eco, making it $71.25 just to coincide with our episode today. And again, to save you guys money. But overall, again, great bait, great conversation, great discount. Check, check, check. Thank you so much, Josh, for stopping by and dropping some glide bait knowledge on us here and helping give us sort of a peek behind the curtain at the Clutch Eco. Okay, folks, that concludes our show today. Get ready. Episode 3 of Breaking the Mold Volume 2 comes at you next week with a guest that shows us that big features and innovation can come in small packages. And sometimes the smallest, the nessiest baits can catch the biggest fish. So there's your teaser. I can't wait to hear your guesses on who you think next week's guest is. I can promise you it's a great one. But in the meantime, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Tackle Talk Podcast. Find us on the internet, tackletalkpodcast.com. Shoot us an email, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.